Denise Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal, Book 3 of the Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 25. As Drew watched Naomi trudge down the hill, he longed to follow her, but he didn't dare. He'd give her a chance to recollect her thoughts, and when they returned to the triage area, he'd make sure she sat down and took a break. She may have developed hypothermia and she needed to rest. She'd worked so hard for so many hours, and after they'd reached the crest of the hill, she'd been breathless. It'd been a good 2-mile hike, all uphill, and he had a feeling that once her adrenaline crashed, she'd be so exhausted she'd get sick. Above all else, he wanted to guard against her getting sick. After a few minutes, he reached the triage area and attended to the cleanup, but in the back of his mind, he fretted over Naomi. She'd undergone an incredibly strenuous, stressful day. She'd started her day off with a 3-mile hike around the lake and then underwent 12 hours of high-stress, high-stakes care of people in critical condition, followed by a grueling 10-minute hike right up the side of the mountain. She was breathless and worn out. Yet she'd hunkered down and performed a complicated procedure involving the insertion of a chest tube, a procedure that'd be difficult in the sterilized surgical setting of an operating room. And at the last moment, she'd started to falter. The poor girl had endured more than was humanely possible. He kept glancing over at her as she sat on a chair and drained a water bottle. Something was wrong. She stood up, staggered off to one side, grabbed a hold of a tent pole and clutched it, breathing hard. He ran up to her and touched her shoulder. "Naomi? Leave me alone. Naomi, what's wrong?" His fingers circled her wrist and noted her pulse. Despite being upset, she smiled faintly at this. "Always a doctor," she said under her breath. "And you're always a surgeon," he said admiringly. "Oh, how you talk." "Come here," he said, taking her by the hand and leading her back to a camp chair. "Sit down here and let me get everything cleaned up, then I'm taking you home." He thrust a water bottle in her hands, then turned away to work with the other volunteers to finish packing up the emergency shelter. He never lost sight of her and kept watch over her out of the corner of his eye. She finished the second bottle of water in a minute, and he handed her a third one. When she demurred, he said, "You're dehydrated, and if you don't sit down and take it easy, I'll put you in an ambulance and send you to the hospital for treatment." She rolled her eyes. "Jeezle Pete's, I'm fine. I think you've got altitude sickness." "What?" "You had to walk really fast to get up the mountainside. It was a 10-minute run, and you were on your knees, and then you stood up too quickly, and now you need to give yourself time to recover." "It's not altitude sickness," she said. She sounded like a 5-year-old girl. "It is too," he said. "You got sick right after we finished taking care of Ricardo Velasquez." At this, she stopped, grew silent, then considered. "All right," she said in a subdued voice, "I've got altitude sickness." And just like that, Drew realized that she wasn't suffering from altitude sickness. Something was troubling her deeply, and it wasn't a physical sickness. She was concealing something from him. And then it hit him, the realization. Did he really want to be with a woman who hid things from him? Did he want to get involved with another Danielle? Drew feared that Naomi was doing the same thing as his ex-wife, and he couldn't bear to experience that over again. This time it would be much worse. Danielle never wanted to be in Gnometown. At least Naomi had come on her own. But he had a funny feeling that she'd done this to get as far away from something that troubled her. And he suspected the something was a person in the form of Ricardo Velazquez.